Well, hello everybody, and welcome to what I think is going to be a fascinating discussion with Antony Gormley. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name's Gillian Tett. I'm the newish Provost, the 45th Provost. I've learnt in America not to go around saying that I'm the 45th of anything, because, of course, if you're American, you sigh and think of Donald Trump. But anyway, I'm the 45th Provost, and what that means, I should say up front, is actually I'm a bit of an interloper in this conversation, because I only arrived 3 or 4 months ago, and the person who had whose brainchild this whole project was very much Mike Proctor, my predecessor, the 44th Provost, who has been working on this for a very long time. And this project has been in the works for a long time. So before I kick off with the questions and discussion, and we are going to have a discussion in a moment, I'd just like to give a round of applause, please, to Antony Gormley and Mike and Roger and I for this whole project, because without them, none of this would have happened. So can we please start with a quick note? Well, I'm really excited to be doing this interview today because, as I said earlier, I was in Davos last week, and the World Economic Forum this year was all about AI. Almost every single conversation was about AI. And, because I spend a lot of my time as a journalist being what I call an inflatable moderator, people put me on panels and I moderate things. I happened to do about 4 separate panels where I was moderating conversations on AI. And I had a whole long cast of characters to talk to about that. People like Mustafa Suleyman, the co-founder of DeepMind. I had the Google team at one point. I had Tim Berners-Lee. I even had will.i.am, the black rapper, who was also talking about AI, and he has very strong, passionate, extremely interesting views on AI, which were somewhat unexpected. I'm hoping at some point to get him to Cambridge to talk about them, because he really is extremely interesting as a voice of an artist that's trying to mediate what AI actually means in practice. But this is a first, because I've never actually had a bona fide artist who works with stone and metal rather than music to talk to about AI. And I think it's truly fantastic to have you here talking about the legacy of Alan Turing and AI, because, as I also said earlier, I moderated an event with Johnny Ive, the man who gave us all this iPhone from Apple, a couple of years ago, who was very worked up about the fact that although governments today talk endlessly about the need to support STEM research and STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and maths, what Johnny and many other of the voices in Silicon Valley are saying is actually, it's not about STEM, it's about STEAM. Science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. And we need to talk about STEAM both in order to ensure that we bring the arts and humanities into the creative process of computer science and ensure that there is a wider vision into what computer science is doing, and to ensure that we use the brilliant communicative talents of artists to enable society to talk about AI and technology and the future and where we're going. AI must not simply stay in a little ghetto of computer scientists. It needs to be interacted and brought into a wider conversation in society more broadly. And you've done that brilliantly with a statue of Alan Turing.
Not a statue.
Sorry, not a statue, though. Sorry, not a statue. Sorry, a sculpture. I was about to come on to that. With a sculpture of a sculpture honouring the memory of Alan Turing. So perhaps I can start with this. We're going to talk a bit about your creative process, what you try to do with this sculpture, not statue, how you see technology and art combining, and then talk a bit about the legacy of Alan Turing and how you see this creating challenges for society today. But let me start with that very important point that you started with, which is, this is not a statue, it's a sculpture. As somebody who is one of Britain's foremost sculpture experts, what can I call you? Artist, sculpturer?
No, I'm a sculptor.
Sculptor. someone who's one of Britain's most foremost sculptors, who have got your creations in all kinds of places, raising our eyes to the heavens and raising our eyes to higher thoughts and things. Tell us why it's so important to you to draw a distinction between a sculpture and a statue, and why that matters with Alan Turing.
Well, first of all, it's just so special to be here after this long and winding road of talking about the work, and today it's actually here. And I just think it is a wonderful example of how actually exactly what Gillian's talking about, communicating across different interest groups. There was an enormous amount of resistance to this, and not just from the planners, but from the city as well. Anyway, the distinction, in my view, between a statue and a sculpture is that a statue is a form of representation. It's usually about a particular person. We have a history of male military statues, for example. You can think of, obviously, Nelson on his column. On the whole, a statue is, yes, it reminds us about a particular life, usually an important life, often connected to power. It is, usually some form of portrait. In other words, it's an idealized individual that represents either a kind of particular moral point or a particular historic kind of moment. And I am not interested in representation per se. I am interested in making objects that are almost interrogations of what an object can be. And I want those objects to be reflexive, which means that it isn't about recognizing something that you'd already heard about and now is illustrated by the object, but about inviting somebody to look at this thing that needs their active participation. So that in some senses, the work is not about something that has already been known, but about the engagement of the beholder's share in a kind of collaboration which involves, well, a form, I think, of projection. And maybe the simplest way that I can characterize this is the distinction between the body pictured as a thing and the body thought about as a place. And the work that we've all been celebrating the arrival of, yes, it looks perhaps like a construction. It has the same syntax as a building. So that relationship between, as it were, a vessel, which you could say a pot is a vessel, but you could also say a house is a vessel, and the body as a place of dwelling rather than a place of representation or a thing that can be represented, is the model that I would use. Right. And I think that this is really, really important. The active engagement of the viewer, the invitation of this still silent thing for you to circumnavigate it, to think about its part-whole relations, to be, as it were, intuitively interpreting, as you might music, the attitude, the timbre, the feel of this thing, in spite of it. If I'm talking a bit like Antony now, it's not surprising, since that was the dominant sculptural form, you could say, when I was at art school. But I want to use that idea of part-whole relations as a kind of gestalt that involves then the viewer.
So I'm curious, because this idea of exploring how the body fits into the space around it and the landscape has been a key feature of much of your work over the years. What makes this one so interesting is that Cambridge for a while was home to you. You were at the other place, known as Trinity.
Yeah.
We'll forgive you that. But, you know, in a sense, you've come back home and you're trying to create a sculpture, not a statue, but a sculpture of somebody who was kind of half at home in Cambridge, half not. I'm curious about how you feel about this place as a university with all the wonderful stonework that you must know so well. How did it feel to you to come back and be trying to create a sculpture of somebody who was also here but not always happily here?
Yeah, it's just a really interesting thing that King's, as it were, unlike Trinity, its biggest cloister, you could say, is missing its northern, or what side would that be? Is it the western side? The northern side. It is the northern side.
What about the river side?
The river side. It's open to the river. And I think this is, I guess that, you know, I went to school and was educated by monks. I am both a product of and nostalgically fond of the idea of the monastic cloister as giving the necessary, in a way, conditions for real contemplative thought, maybe real in-depth thinking. And yet at the same time, I've always admired this college in respect of, you know, mine with its great court, that actually it is open, and it's open to the north. And that seems to me a metaphor for the attitudes of sexuality at the time of John Maynard Keynes. The overall feeling. When I was here, I mean, many of my friends that were at King's are with us in this room now. This was the college that, in a sense, was the most exciting. We had, you know, Mark Lancaster and then Michael Craig Martin here as artist in residence. The music that was being, the experimental music that came out of New York and Lamont Young and Zarzuela, that was happening here. The films that were made and shown here. There was an openness in this college to the world at large. I mean, it was a good time to be at Cambridge, I have to say. The late 60s was, you know, I don't think we saw our time here as giving us a meal ticket to then find our place within the, as it were, established late capitalist kind of structure. It was to expand the horizons of your exploration. Anyway, coming back, I am both delighted and slightly appalled by the fact that this isn't more controversial. I said it out there and I'll say it again, that somehow I wanted it to be a little bit of a stirring thing that contrasted, as it were, with, well, that idea that somehow the Gothic and the medieval monastery is the model for scholastic life. And somehow say, no, you know, we are all children of the Industrial Revolution, and no, we actually all, as it were, are students of a wider world than the one that can be contained within a cloister. You know, I go back to the fact that we are all, in a way, connected to, all human thought through our external brains, and this is such a radical. This is the gift of Turing, and it's so radical in terms of our availability to knowledge, to all of the thoughts of all cultures of all time, in a way that has never ever been true before. So that idea of teaching to test and us thinking about our intelligence as being proven by what we can repeat from facts that we have derived from books or from our tutorials or from being replaced by something else, which is, I think, how we manage our own curiosity in the availability of endless strings of information.
Right. Well, I got a chance to speak to some of your old gang from when you were here, many of whom are here tonight. I gather that you go off once a year and go camping together.
Yeah.
Or glamping together, probably.
No,
right.
It's not so glamping.
Or maybe not glamping, yeah. Well, it didn't sound quite like the Boy Scout camp anyway. But you get together. It's wonderful. You've got this amazing network of people who you've now known for all those years and meet up once a year. And I asked some of them what I should ask you. And one of the themes that cropped up a lot is the way that you are trying to explore the interface between art and technology. Because, we have this image of an artist sitting in the studio just painting a few things on a canvas and that's all done. And for you, it's a very technological, very physical process, isn't it?
I think, I tried to say something about this out there. So far as I'm concerned, we still inherit this idea of the lone artist in his own studio determining the nature of his work, the time it takes, and what it is. I think that that's a very erroneous and slightly sad image of the identity and indeed working processes of an artist. The great joy to me is collaboration. Collaboration with everything from amazing IT experts to engineers to, I love collaborating with dancers. I love collaborating with musicians. I love collaborating with filmmakers. And I think, the best thing that my life has taught me is that the more people you get together that are united by a similar sense of the world is not to be accepted and find, your niche in it, but to somehow make a new world simply through the interconnection of skills and passions that comes. And that comes with people. I mean, that's what's so incredible. If education has fulfilled us in uniting us with the things that really make our hearts beat more powerfully, that inspire us, then if you get those people, they will inspire each other. And I think that, Tim Berners-Lee, in inventing the World Wide Web, gave us a tool of the democratic sharing, or you could say not just of knowledge, but of experience. I was lucky enough to sit next to him at a dinner once, and I think, what he expressed to me was his sadness that democratic principle of ultimate sharing had been undermined by late capital advertising, and the degree to which this tool that he saw as an amazing opening, as was the work of Turing, to a democratically shared, the removal of, those ancient, in the time when, anybody who thought had to think in Latin and left the rest of the world out, that division between those who had access to knowledge and those that didn't was over. And I still feel that's the great potential. That is the great potential of all of these tools. And I said it to you just now, if Leonardo had been alive, he would be using Rhino. He would be using this software program that allows you to invent and make a form, turn it around in space, look at it from places maybe that nobody would ever be able to look at it again, but to see it as an integrity in a way that maybe you would never be able to see it as an integrity if it was a lump of stuff that you were trying to kind of carve into a meaningful shape.
Right.
And anyway, I think the potential of digital technology is enormous, and it, I just said to you just now, the studio has, we built this studio, which was a kind of physical manifesto of what I felt.
And that's a studio necessary. That you work from.
In King's Cross. And it's interesting, we were able at one point to move into the next door, which had been a printing workshop and had really thick, 4 foot thick floors. Wonderful, flat, and you can put 10 tons down anywhere and there's no problem. But interestingly, the old workshop, which is where a lot of the things were conceived and made in maquette form, has now turned into a place where everybody has their computer. And when we moved in there were 3 computers. One of them was used for kind of doing the accounts, and the other 2 were used for writing emails and stuff. But now every single co-worker, every one of my assistants has a computer.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the themes of Davos in relation to AI really plugs into this, which is the fundamental question of whether the internet has been a democratizing force or a centralizing force. Has it enabled power and knowledge to be distributed in an equal way, or has it actually concentrated power back in the hands of a few big tech companies? And with AI, the questions are even more intense. And so someone like Tim Berners-Lee, who had this vision of technology, the computer age, being a democratizing force, is really confronting, the fact that you've got increasing, concentration tendencies as well. When you think about Alan Turing, who was part of a system that treated him pretty badly, what were you trying to illustrate with your sculpture? I mean, were there particular themes from his life that really inspired you, that you think we need to be challenged by today?
Again, I think I tried to articulate this out there when we were standing around the work. This extraordinary, very sensitive man who, in a way, never had intimacy, never had a kind of containing, organic home life, and transmitted his. I mean, it's just reading the transcripts of his speeches or that BBC broadcast from 1951. He had a wonderful sense of humour, a delicate, funny, quizzical, self-effacing character, and I think it was while using, as it were, the tools that he has placed at our disposal, I really did want to talk about the man, even though I never met him. This mixture of, I use that word, it's a kind of self-effacing person who was never interested in rewards, awards, recognition per se, but was interested in, as it were, asking those questions. How do we think? And I suppose, for me, at the core of this, and this is maybe an anthropological proposition, our species has had to make models of itself in order to understand itself. What Alan Turing was trying to do, almost like an artist, was ask what are the, as it were, logical mechanics of cognition, and make a machine that mirrored it. And in the process of doing that, in a way, giving us a model of ourselves. And maybe that's the position that we are in now, where we have to make a distinction, as it were, between the kind of thinking that Alan Turing did, which was from first principles, and now this strange phenomena of our so-called artificial intelligence, which literally skims off the available imagery and concepts of an ocean, a deep ocean of human research and thinking, and repackages it instantly, I'm thinking about ChatGPT, in a kind of seamless and almost immediately kind of, consumable way. And that's where I get very concerned.
So, I mean, what you're really talking about is, you know, insofar as we think that today AI systems, machine learning systems, are using all the data they can find on the internet to create their models, essentially they're taking the IP of writers, artists, musicians, everyone else for free. And obviously one of the really hot burning controversies right now is whether they should be paying people for that. Someone like will.i.am would use the image of, he would argue very strongly that, you know, the arts are only going to survive and thrive in an AI age if people actually have their own IP and data. And the image he uses is that it's a bit like your shadow. No one would ever try and take your shadow from you. Why do tech companies think they can take your digital shadow from you and use things like, you know, create new compounds with that? But I mean, would you stand in the camp of saying that actually people should be compensated from their IP, or is that unrealistic?
I think that sources need to be recognised. Sources need to be acknowledged, because otherwise we're dealing with a kind of spam. And I mean that spam as in kind of, you know, the floor sweepings from the walls, kind of sausage factory that then get kind of, you know, presented as real life sustenance food. This is what. Sorry, that's a very ugly metaphor, but
no. But I mean, you know, a DALL-E program or a visual program could be picking up, you know, images of the sculpture and turning that into something which will be regurgitated in the future.
I think it is the regurgitation, the processing. It is like the Kraft cheese version of cheese, which is not cheese, and I think that is the problem. I think that ChatGPT has an amazing potential as a research tool, but in a way you can allow it to do its thing, but then you have to go back, having kind of hopefully recognized where the tone of the voice comes from. I've only been on ChatGPT once, and we asked it a question, for instance, about, you know, Vic and Parsons, my dear wife, who has helped me all through my life as an artist. I think it's important that artists get together with other artists, because they're the only ones who can really understand how how a life like that could work. But you know, it was very authoritative, but quite wrong about some very, very basic things. Like it said you were born in where? In Beirut, yeah.
Right. So I think that's called hallucination. Yes. One of the problems with ChatGPT is hallucinations. You said earlier that you don't think that AI can emote or have any sense of empathy for people. Again, that's a very hot topic for debate right now, because in fact some people who are developing AI programs would say that actually AI programs are starting to show a huge amount of empathy when they actually communicate with humans. That, you know, if you believe that we're going to have ChatGPT 6, 8, 10 in the coming years, as some people do, then actually, you know, quasi-AGI is not that far off, and we can start to get real interactions which are much more human-like. You would agree with that or disagree? Because, I mean, some of the panels I moderated, there was fierce disagreement between people on this point who are involved in developing AI.
I don't know. The warning bells to me are, you know, we now know so much. We are monitoring ourselves so carefully that, you know, advertisers can know exactly what emotive triggers are necessary in order to make you want something that you don't particularly need. Exactly the same is true, I think, for the potential of AI to, as it were, use diminuendo in creating music in order to make you feel, moved or sad, and or excited or randy or whatever. And I'm worried with this. Ian McEwan made that kind of extraordinary Machines Like Us book. That notion that the imitation game, started by Turing, has ended up with these machines that can replicate, as it were, emotional triggers, but for the purposes of manipulation rather than the purposes of extension or real empathy. Because I think empathy has to be between creatures. And maybe this is anathema to those that believe, as Lovelock did in his last phase, that the cyborg phase of evolution is a natural part of evolutionary kind of process. But my feeling is that once we have separated from the biosphere, from our creatureliness, we have lost the better part of our natures.
Right. Well, it's very interesting because I set out last year I read an article trying to look at the Turing test of whether or not ChatGPT or AI platforms could be funny. Because, of course, one of Turing's tests was, whether you thought that, essentially a computer could mimic a human and whether they could tell a convincing joke or not. And I, 5 years ago, gave a series of speeches saying the one thing about AI bots was that they would never be able to tell a really funny joke. So the one class of workers who had job security were comedians. And it turned out I was completely wrong. Because, in fact, these days there are a number of AI platforms which are producing perfectly good, what they call computational humor, in the basic kind of wordplay, Christmas cracker type of joke. And more importantly, I went along to what they call a comedy roast, where you had an AI-enabled bot competing with a human to see who could be funnier. And then the audience gets to vote. And the one that I went to, the audience voted for the AI bot.
Oh dear.
Which was partly a function of the fact that the human comedian was actually very bad. And most human comedians actually are quite bad, if any of you have been to stand-up comedy clubs. But it was also a function of the fact that actually the AI bot was becoming increasingly good at copying the human and outsmarting them. Does that scare you? Are you worried that one day there's going to be an Antony Gormley AI bot producing a sculpture?
No, I did find on somewhere, like make your own Antony Gormley, 5 steps to making a digital body, and it was really, really scary, and I am scared. I think that I'm very happy with people doing diagnosis, of doing legal documents, of helping with finance. I think once we start laughing at machines, it won't be long before they're deciding which of us should be eliminated.
Right, okay. Well, on that cheery note, I'm going to turn in just a moment to the audience for any questions. I know we've got a lot of people here who are incredibly much more knowledgeable about AI than certainly I am. And I've got lots of views. We've also got a lot of people who know a lot about art and a lot of people who know about Alan Turing. But while you're thinking of your questions, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, I quoted Johnny Ive earlier on the idea of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. I'm curious, do you think that it's time for universities to force computer scientists to go into your lab, into an art room and do some art as well as all their equations and algorithms? Do you think that actually there should be much more intervention in education to try and bridge that great, divide that C.P. Snow spoke about?
I think that,
and both ways. I mean, artists should be taught how to code as well.
Absolutely. I think that artists have to embrace technology, but I think also the society as a whole, and particularly in schools. I mean, everything you said about STEAM is absolutely essential. I mean, I think that this is, in the end, a kind of, it's the disease of our late capitalist system giving us a value system, giving us an idea of a structure of the world in which we are kind of invited to become slaves to a overproducing, overheated production system that is based on encouraging unnecessary needs, and where each of our agencies is entirely judged on our ability to consume. And the need, in my view, it's just very, very simple. We cannot have endless growth. We live on a kind of limited resourced planet, and we've got to find a new way of living in it and on it and with it. And where are those alternatives going to come from? They have to come from the kind of thinking, the kind of blue sky or open-ended thinking that in the old days used to be provided by art schools. Art schools, since they become universities, have also fallen into the trap of teaching to test. But it's so important at school to reinforce the agency that comes with making something that you have made. And for me, and this is something I'm so passionate. I know that I would not be here talking to you today had there not been an art room in my school that was right in the middle of the school, and it was where at any time of the day I could repair to, even like if I had 5 minutes before kind of first roll call, or quarter of an hour at break at 11 o'clock, you rush up there and kind of get something going. And then, if you've got another 15 minutes before games, you get up there after. And why was that important? Because this was the place where something was being made, was being germinated, that didn't come out, as it were, from the history of all of the brilliant kind of acts and thoughts of our species, but came out of you and your whole kind of world.
And do you think you would have done that if you had an iPhone to distract you with social media?
Well, probably less so. I mean, I think that the invasion into the inner worlds of people when they're actually just discovering, as it were, their potential to make and to make a difference, is being sort of cauterized or kind of acidically eaten away at,
or commoditized
by this need to compete on a very exposing, intimate level with a peer group, and it's really, I believe that we do have unique, we can call them souls. We have unique kind of trajectories between first-hand palpable experience and the way that our brains work, that is unique to each and every one of us. And this kind of flattening of that uniqueness through Facebook, through TikTok, through Snapchat, through whatever, I think it's really eroding that.
Yeah, so I think many people in the room would agree. It's very telling that a lot of the great Silicon Valley luminaries send their kids to schools where they spend their time banging bits of wood together, and they're not allowed to have any screens until quite late in life. But anyway, questions. We have, as I said, an incredible audience here of thinkers, and we got one question already in the front row. It would be courteous but not compulsory to identify yourself. And for everyone else, if not for Antony. And to get as many questions as possible, there we are over here. We've got a roving microphone. Do make them relatively not too short, but not too long.
My name's Dermot Turing, so you can figure out why I'm here.
So
I
good
wanted
that you're
to get back to your artwork, please, if I may. The standard narrative, which I suspect nobody in this room would sort of fall for, but if you ask anybody who reads a print newspaper, they would immediately recognise. The standard narrative of Alan Turing's life is that was the code-breaker guy who won World War II single-handedly because he did this amazing Enigma thing, and then was hounded by an intolerant state to his own death. When I look at your work, I don't see that narrative in there, and I'd like you to comment, if you would please, on the extent to which that was present in your mind when you were conceiving the work, and whether you wanted to move away from that. What other themes, I suspect there's a lot of depth that went into your thinking behind it. What other themes were present? And effectively, my question is about dimensionality, if that makes sense. I should stop talking and allow you to do the talking now.
No, that's a wonderful question. Just while to give Antony a moment just to collect his thoughts, I'm sure everyone in the room is wondering what relation you are to Alan Turing. Are you a nephew or...
Yes.
A nephew. Okay, I'm guessing that, but it didn't work. Okay, so nephew of Alan Turing asking a question about how did you have the elements of his life trajectory in your mind or not, in particular the betrayal by the establishment?
I think that the best way that I can put it is that I wanted to evoke an attitude of curiosity. So the twist in the body, you can say that the feet are facing 90 degrees to the head. I wanted that twist, which I hope is about being aware of a wider world, and then that leaning forwards that is to do with looking to the future. And you may say, well, that's all wishful thinking, but I think I am wanting people to, as it were, I always use this analogy. If you know somebody, you can see it probably at 500 yards. If you don't know somebody so well, perhaps it's sort of more like 100 yards. But you can tell from the attitude of a body what their, as it were, internal condition is. And you may say, well, this is all very mysterious or somehow, but I fundamentally believe that somehow if we ignore the accidents of appearance that have been so like entrenched in, as it were, the image making of statues, and invite people to inhabit this, in a way, concatenation of lumps of stuff, but say this has something to do with the spirit of an individual. And maybe that's also a very dangerous word, spirit of an individual. But I would call it the attitude, and liberate that from the idea of illustration or anything to do with representation. And it does, I think I go back to where we started. I think it does invite projection and empathy. Can we use this object as a place in which perhaps something to do, maybe indirectly, with the life of this man can be, in a way, summoned?
So the twist in the sculpture invokes a twist in his life in that way.
And I think, a kind of, I suppose, spinning awareness of the widest horizons. That's another kind of deep perception that I have, and I say this a lot, we all live at the other side of our own appearances. We exist, as it were, in the space of the darkness of the body. I think that Turing was like looking beyond the accidents of appearance at, as it were, the in a way almost the syntax or skeleton structure of thought itself. And I guess I would like to say that in spite of it being 3.5 tons, in spite of it being made of this relatively long-lasting material, it's actually all about relationships. It's all about the relationship between those blocks, the fact that it is, in a way, in jeopardy. It's a thing in constant balance, or has the potential to fall. It's a if you like, it's a statue that admits to the final kind of reality of all things that are vertical to become horizontal. But it invites you to be, as it were, an active participant in that kind of relational field.
I'm curious whether any of the members of the Turing family, whether maybe you would like to comment on what you think, if you have any sense of what Alan Turing himself would have made of it, if he were to ever come back and see the statue. Maybe we can have a microphone come down, because I'd be curious to have a comment.
How many other Turings are there in the room? 2. Okay.
2. So you can choose which one who...
Okay.
Right.
Okay, the danger here, this becomes a Turing Gormley
No, I think people here would be fascinated to know what,
I was fascinated by what you just said, and I'm so pleased that you are not trying to do an Alan Turing life narrative with your work. You're talking in abstract nouns about philosophical concepts. But I thought you might, you probably know this already, but Alan Turing's last research student, a chap called Bernard Richards, when I talked to him about what it was like being Alan Turing's research student, he said, the thing about his way of approaching a problem is that he would always look at it orthogonally. He said it was like going along in a train and looking out of the window at right angles to the direction of travel, and that's what he would see. And Jonathan Swinton will then start talking about Fourier spaces in a minute, and about how that's sort of effectively a way of looking at developing plants in a sort of an orthogonal kind of a way, and your statue just captures that perfectly. Sorry, sculpture.
Sorry, this was not a setup.
and I'm going to be clipped around the ear by your agent, who is sitting right next to me. So there we go. Enough from the Turings. Let's hear from somebody else.
No, I think that's a very, very valuable, very interesting thought, indeed. And I think capturing that idea of, doing your spiritual inquiry orthogonally, excuse my clumsy language, is very powerful.
But it's interesting, isn't it, the way that signposts are often at crossroads. And it's interesting that, in a way, we have learnt to live with, if you like, 2-dimensional or at the most 3-dimensional crossroads. And I think that what I'm trying to do with these works is make signposts that, in a way, have a temporal invitation as well. So you could say, yes, the work is responding to the major axes of the way that this site is inhabited, but it's also going like vertically into space and going down into the ground. And that notion of orientation and where we orientate ourselves in a field of experience, that is also, in a way, at the background of my thinking. A gimbal on a boat, the way that a spinning top stays vertical, in some curious way has some reference, and why it was very important to me that there was no visible means of connection, and that you're invited to think about this as an active as it were, stack of dead weights that are, as it were, mutually dependent on each other in order to retain this verticality.
It's a bit like the chapel in that respect.
Yeah, maybe.
A miracle of engineering. Right, we should take some more questions right now. Anyone got any other questions or comments they'd like to make? Got one right at the back over there.
Hi, I'm Tim Marlowe, and I've publicly supported the sculpture, so take this question.
Thank you for that.
Take this question in the spirit with which it's intended, which is of admiration and delight that it's happened. So you're a major distinguished artist with a language and a practice that is internationally recognised. That seems so appropriate to recognise the achievements of Turing. But as we've just heard, I think, from your eloquent discussion, but also from the family, he was nuanced and complicated. And probably there are many ways that one could still commemorate the achievement. So it's a difficult question to ask an artist what the legacy of the sculpture might be. And I'm not asking you to talk about in terms of the audiences or the people at this university who see it. But what other artistic responses do you think validly or are necessary for Turing? And what might your work do to generate that kind of response? Because clearly one beautiful, elegant, eloquent, monumental sculpture in Keynes is wonderful, but it has to be a starting point. It can't be an end point, can it?
Should we turn it into a meme? That was a joke, sorry.
I would love to see, as it were, a musical interpretation of the work true for Alan Turing, because there's something.
You mean like Hamilton?
No, I wasn't thinking of a kind of narrative, historic. I was thinking more.
I can see absolute horror for the Turing family immediately. No, I was trying.
No, I was thinking more in the manner of Steve Reich or maybe
a musical composition.
A musical composition that uses blocks of sonority. I mean, it's interesting, the Chardin problem, 1936 paper, just suggests this whole notion of halt and the whole notion of interval and the whole notion of an algorithm that is, either searching for, the last potential prime number. The idea that there's an iterative inevitability about structure that I think is implied by Turing's thought. I think I can see that in, I mentioned Steve Reich, very, very good example of serial music that could be said to be a mirror of serial computational kind of evolutionary form. And the most general way of answering your question is that we are in many ways my son Guy is very involved in electronic music. None of that is possible without the systems and matrices that Turing has bequeathed to us. And I do think that probably music is the most pertinent and immediate way that Turing's thinking has influenced creative.
I think you've thrown down a gauntlet then to all the musicians in Cambridge to try and create something. We got a question over there, and then one at the very back.
My name is Cornelia, and I'm a PhD student here. First of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for this wonderful sculpture. I wanted to ask you about something that AI certainly can't do or can't have, and that's embodied experience. Of course, embodied experience is so essential when we look at art, and I was thinking, when you were talking about the sculpture outside earlier and you were describing the textures left on the surface from the process of making it, about touch, which is of course essential, especially to sculpture. Now, this artwork is going to be surrounded by students and it's sure to be touched quite a lot. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on the role of touch within an artwork like this, perhaps especially in a place like this.
Well, isn't that the first thing that anybody does when they're presented with a thing in their space?
Particularly there's a sign up saying "Do not touch."
No,
I usually go to
I'm hoping that we can avoid that, but that is the first thing you do, isn't it? You tap it and say, well, is it solid or hollow? And then you kind of want the affirmation that your intuitive, palpable, first-hand kind of experience of the thing visually is then reinforced by touch, and that is so legitimate in my. And by the way, Tristan insists that it can take 12 people climbing it and sitting on it.
I'm not sure you should tell the students that right now, because that's going to be taken as an instant challenge.
But I mean, we know they got a mini, didn't they, on top of the chapel, and this is a challenge to all the engineers at Keynes. But I think, I think for me, sculpture is particularly in a digital age, even if this sculpture is derived from digital means, is an invitation to first-hand, palpable experience. And that means, I just did a show, well, it's still on, which has a work called Resting Place, which is made out of about 110 tons of earth, of clay, of fired clay. And the smell of that show is as important as the thing. The true for Alan, it doesn't smell. It might smell after rain, and in maybe the summer months. But anyway, I think that it is the palpable that is so important in a digital age. Here is a work that is in our world, in our space, that invites first-hand physical experience.
So if people climb on it, it's not going to fall down?
No, it's not going to fall down. Well, I mean, if it does fall down, you have to pick up Tristan and say, please, what went wrong, and make sure that
right.
When it goes
well, that's
back
not an
up.
encouragement for anyone to climb on it, but anyway, we've got a question over here.
Hi, Conrad Shawcross. I wanted just to ask a question about the people before Alan Turing, is a sort of Lovelace and Babbage, and if you look at these trajectories, obviously there's a commonality of what they were trying to achieve, but the other thing that sits quite uncomfortably is the way they were treated, and the kind of the way that society, and I guess the heavy price you pay for being ahead of your time. And obviously Babbage's situation is different from Turing's, but I guess the question to you I was going to ask is whether you think that society has got better at kind of embracing or being able to understand people who are ahead of their time, and the creatives or the geniuses of today, or are we still shunning and ignoring and ostracizing talent, or are we nurturing and have we got better at it? Or in 100 years' time, are there going to be people on banknotes that today are pariahs?
It's an impossible question to answer with any degree of certainty. I think that I would. There are a lot of artists that I admire and respect the work of that have completely resisted the commercial realm, and yet the commercial realm remains, as it were, the only way often that you can support an exploratory practice. And so it's quite possible that there are I mean, it's the Emily Dickinson problem, that there are necessary sensibilities that are, instinctively resistant to, as it were, the noise of the world, because they recognize the importance of intimacy and engagement at a level that just would be destroyed, if you like, by as it were, the promotional mechanisms of today. But at the same time, I think that that should be what Tim Berners-Lee's invention has made less likely to happen, so that we are all originators, we are all invited to share whatever realizations we've had or experimentations that we want to pursue with a wider world. And while there's dangers of silos, at the same time, it's a remark. I mean, never before in the history of our species has there been such an opportunity for link-up and collaboration through the World Wide Web and the Internet. And so that, how this battle, if you like, between sensitivity and commercialization, ends up, I don't know. All I know is that, it was funny seeing Jeremy Hunt sort of in that long thing from Davos and trying to see what this, Chancellor is thinking about in relation to AI. But everybody has got the dollar sign somehow very, very high up on there. And that's sad for me, because I think that this is, this should be an amplification of the deep potential of radical thought. But so often, in the way that it's disseminated and packaged, it is the commercial that has determined, as it were, the form that it takes.
Absolutely. I've got a question up here, and then if there are any more questions up there, wave your hands. Okay, one, two, and then we've got about another 10 minutes or so let's keep it, yeah.
So I want to come back to bodies a bit.
Oh, good,
and,
yeah.
And I think probably like the rest of the room, kind of share with you your dismay about intimacy in late capitalism, as you put it, or the lack of connections we have. But perhaps we shouldn't forget that in the kind of mathematical education that I had, that lots of people in this room contribute to, that Turing had, that comes from an aesthetic and a need mathematicians often have, or a reason they like about the subject, that they're separated from their bodies. That there's a sense that it can be about pure thought. That's the aesthetic, which is a disconnection from your body, from your society. And in some ways that's very successful, and that took Turing a long way. But it's not enough, I think. And when you were talking about artists, scientists should go into artists' spaces, I'm not sure that's true, but I really think they should be taught to dance. They should be.
I think we should all dance much more often. We should all sing much more often. We should all walk much more often. The compartmentalization of our physical selves is really the tragedy of our time, and the fact that we spend so much time inertly kind of at screens when, in many senses, the most glorious things is.
Maybe we can organise a midsummer dance party around the statue.
Yeah, no, it'd be good. That would be really good.
Sorry, around the sculpture, not the statue. Thank you for correcting me. We're going to ban the word statue.
So, Gillian, I'm Frances Morris, old friend of Antony's, and congratulations on your new appointment here. And I've got a question for you, if I may. And I just want to go back to your opening remarks where you talked about the relationship between STEM and STEAM and the need for us societally to bring back arts into the space. And it's interestingly, I think, just picks up really on what the comments you've just made, that we do need to dance and sing. But in your new position here as Provost of Tett, you have of Keynes. you kind of are in a unique.
This is much better than Tate, by the way.
Well, dare I say that I see myself as part of your community and Tett's community, and I think we could collaborate very with fruitful results, but you do have a unique opportunity in such a esteemed institution to take a leading role in articulating and indeed acting out a new version of STEAM, which has, over the last 10, 15, 20 years has, as Antony commented, the further education creativity has leached out of the system at both ends, both from primary education but also tertiary education. And I wonder, given your comments, what your thoughts might be about how you would reintroduce or rejuvenate that sense that art is at the core of, other subjects. Where have the humanities gone?
There is still an art room here, is there not? A studio open
Yes.
to the rest of
Yes,
the
and we can
university.
thank Mike Proctor for defending it. So,
Fantastic.
okay, this isn't
Good.
about me today, so I'm going to keep this fairly short. But I have very strong feelings about this. I'm trained as a cultural anthropologist, owe a lot to people like Caroline Humphrey and others. And if I had my way today, I would argue that artificial intelligence, that type of AI, desperately needs anthropology intelligence, which is all about the appreciation of what it means to be human. And when you add artificial intelligence and anthropology intelligence together, you get a third type of AI, which is augmented intelligence. And that actually what we should be aiming for is augmented intelligence in the sense that actually it's not a question of replacing humans or even competing with humans. It's about humans interacting with AI as a tool that basically can be synergistic and bring out what we are essentially looking for. And I think what Alan Turing would have actually wanted his revolution to lead to. So AI plus AI equals the right type of AI, which is augmented intelligence. And within a world of augmented intelligence, 3 points to make. Firstly, the whole vision you have for what AI is going to do to society in terms of productivity in the future begins to change and become a bit less threatening. And secondly, you absolutely need to start celebrating interdisciplinary debate and inquiry and discussion and trying to find ways to develop it in the way that this, not statue, sculpture is doing. And what I find fascinating is that when you talk to people who are leading the AI revolution, and I've spoken with a number of them in the last 6 months, most of them spend a lot of time saying it's not about teaching kids to code. I mean, that's useful, but coding is going to become redundant in the face of advanced forms of AI anyway. It's about teaching them to have the quality of being able to emote, have empathy, think laterally, think widely. And to do that, you absolutely need to bring in the humanities and the arts into education. So oddly enough, in Silicon Valley, there's actually more, not less, appreciation of their need of that cross-fertilization. And there's a number of initiatives underway to try and get that happening. And conversely, there are some artists who are keenly aware of the ability to dance with this new technology and become more creative. I mean, one friend of mine, Agnieszka, who's an artist in Silicon Valley, is doing some amazing stuff in that field. Someone like will.i.am is absolutely trying to interact with AI to be more creative. And I think that's going to be the future in terms of how one actually takes this forward. I mean, there's a lot of thinking going on in a number of higher education establishments right now about how to spark that. Johnny Ive is on his STEAM campaign, which is fantastic. There are many ways of doing it, but it's very encouraging and exciting that that conversation has started. And the last point I'll make is if there's anywhere in the higher educational world in the UK that's well positioned to do it, someone like Keynes, which has the legacy of Alan Turing, the legacy of Edmund Leach, Ernest Gellner, E.M. Forster, all these creatives, and John Maynard Keynes in the past, and those are just and Zadie Smith as well. There's such a wide range of different talents in the history of Keynes that I think could be an amazing platform for the future. And now, of course, we have the sculpture.
I think there are two things to say. One is, Gillian, I think that it has taken you as an anthropologist to explain to us, as it were, the dynamics, almost like a kinship map of the economic world. And it's interesting that you and David Graeber, his work on debt, and now the one that he did with David Wengrove, The Dawn of Everything, you have used your discipline to open up, in a way, an understanding of the root causes of inequality in the world. I mean, that's certainly true of The Dawn of Everything. And I think that anthropology is that thing of like widening the scope of specific disciplines in order to unearth, in a way, unexamined kind of assumptions within a zone of human academic activity. And in that respect, I would say that this is what is missing from the development of AI. I think that the development of AI is all being run by the big companies, whether it's DeepMind or Google, and the economic potential of that, I think, is not being matched by the creative. And I'm delighted to hear that there are artists on the development kind of boards of AI kind of startup companies. But I think that the more, I'm thinking of the artist placement group, Barry Flanagan and John Latham's insistence that, corporations should have the creative impetus of artists who think laterally, who are not thinking about the bottom line, who are not thinking about the profit motive, but are thinking about the potential within a system.
Yeah, I mean, the issue, again, partly is in Alan Turing's day, when he was doing his groundbreaking work, his research was seen as a public good, which was open, and of course the British government essentially co-opted it during World War II for national security reasons, but the cutting-edge research was done within either the university or the government through publicly funded institutions. Today, of course, what's changed in the last 6 to 9 months is that whereas AI research used to be open source, it is now increasingly inside private companies and treated as a proprietary good, and the concept of open source research is sadly fading, and it's something we need to fight for very badly. People like, ironically, Jan LeCun, who's head of AI at Facebook, he came out last week and said, we desperately need to give universities more resources so they actually have the computing power to try and, keep ahead of the cutting edge research and not let it all be in the hands of proprietary tech companies. But that's another discussion. I'm conscious everyone's been sitting here for a very long time. Is there anything you want to say in closing? Because before we let everyone go off and have a drink to celebrate both the sculpture, not statue, and the idea of holistic education?
I'd like to end on where I tried to end on the remarks out by the sculpture. I do think that one of the most wonderful things is to make a work that has a community around it. Make a situated work that is in one place, that isn't just a place, but it is a living community of people. And nowhere is that more exciting than within a university, and nowhere more exciting within this university than this particular college that has always had this wonderful interface between, belief systems and pure research. And I guess that question that I asked, what kind of world will this sculpture be in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years' time? And can it be generative of speculative thinking, of research, of kind of future thinking? Because in a sense, this is the big hinge, the big shift. If you think about the statue, it is all about commemorating, about memorial, about the past. I believe that sculpture has this infinite, and I think that the work of Conrad's here also carries this same spirit, that it's about thinking about what will be. It's about making engines of future potential. And that's why I'm so excited about the fact that this sculpture, after 6.5 years of evolution, is now finally here. Thank you.
Well,
all
it
so
means
much.
that every time any of us walk down to the river, we can walk past that wonderful sculpture, not statue, sculpture, and give a little sort of, if not prayer, not in a spiritual sense, but a little note of thanks for the life of Alan Turing and everything that he's left us with, the challenges and also the hopes for the future. So thank you very much indeed. And here is to looking at the statue, sculpture every day. Thank you.